planning to do, what you are doing, is very similar to Sheffield. Very, very similar. Our thoughts are the same in terms of the imperatives and the drivers is the same. And really, looking at that, I suspect that what I'm going to do is give you a few sort of experiences about what we've found over the last 18 months, 2 years, about maybe what works and what doesn't work. But that's only really Sheffield, so there's no telling how things work individually. It's just to share some experiences and some thoughts, really. First point is, don't let the Director of Health Improvement title put you off. It's not a health-based plan. That's always my first explanation. Don't think this is a 5-a-day plan for the city. It isn't. We as directors all have different portfolios to deal with, and this is just one of the multidisciplinary portfolios that I have to deal with. And I must admit, it's the best one to have to deal with. I'm going to go through very quickly why do we need a plan for food. And they've all got photos and names against them, because the beauty of food is you can actually get people involved. We have a number of food heroes across the city as part of the sort of way that we develop this thinking. And essentially, they are people that do heroic things with food in the city. And we use them year in, year out. And indeed, they vary year in, year out within the food festival and the food plan development. So you will see them. Jed is runs the Sheffield Honey Company. He's got a mention. He'll be happy now. He's got a website. He'll be even happier. So if you want to look at it and order honey from Sheffield, Jez is your man. Why do we need a plan? 70,000 premature deaths could be prevented if diets match nutritional guidelines. To be honest, that one's even more complicated than I'd like it to be, because I quite like it to be even simpler than that. The most hard-hitting health fact, and then I will stop about health after this comment, is if we could reduce our salt intake in Sheffield from 9 grams to 6 grams per person per day, we would save around 300 lives per year. And to put that into context, we currently spend somewhere between £500,000 and £1 million a year from our public health budget doing Freudian slip, doing smoking cessation, and that saves 2 lives a year. Makes you think, doesn't it? It's about 580 deaths in terms of the nutritional guidelines in Sheffield. Environmentally, obviously, the environmental impacts of the food chain, as Lord Curry has already mentioned, are significant. And the greenhouse gas emissions are also extremely significant. And things like food waste, simple things. Your average household nationally is throwing around about 500 quid a year away on food. And probably as a local authority, you are probably picking up the bill to get rid of that, unless you've got some sort of clever anaerobic digestion program within the city. Economically, I don't have the local figures that Lord Curry alluded to for the area here. I've got just the national ones of 7% of national output. It's about £1 billion a year in Sheffield, which always raises a few eyebrows when people start to think, yeah, but it's not that important. It's £1 billion a year economy. I think we normally work ourselves at about 1% of the national numbers. So we're over £1 billion a year in terms of the economic footprint of food in the city. Just an interesting story. Sorry, I digress. But why's that fishmonger got his hand behind his back? I must admit, I don't understand, but I was told by some people within our local authority that photo was originally had a fishmonger with a knife in his hand, but it was seen as potentially inappropriate to have a photograph of a fishmonger with a knife in his hand in our food plan. I must admit, I kicked against it, but decided just to pick my battles and walk away. So from now on, all our fishmongers only deal with bare hands and fish, apparently, in the city. In terms of how we did it, very similar to what you're proposing to do. We looked for some best practice from across the UK. We were fortunate in that we had funding from Sheffield Exchange for Life, which was the national childhood obesity project. And essentially that funded a single officer for 3 years to work with me to deliver the food plan. I understand that your funding is equally fortuitous in that it's coming from an NHS trust fund, PCT trust fund. Make the best of it. And the first thing that I'd say, the first piece of advice is start planning now how you're going to keep that going after 3 years. Because, you've just got the good news, which is that you've got the funding, and the bad news is that it runs out in less than 3 years now. So you need to be thinking about that. That's the first point. We had a number of steering groups established after we'd developed the sort of themes. And the most incredible thing that I found as we were developing the food plan for the city was the amount of infrastructure that was there that the local authority didn't know about. Local authorities always think that they've got a handle on everything, but when you put a banner up that says people involved in food wanting to get involved in a food plan, believe me, there were people coming from all over the place that we had no idea existed. And that was a bit of a lesson for us, and I suspect it will be exactly the same here. In terms of consultation on the way that we developed the plan, we basically wanted to say, okay, what are the big ideas? What are the big themes? What are the big things that people are concerned about? And we went out to consultation. And basically we called a number of meetings with a number of different key stakeholders in partnership with these people that came out of the woodwork when we said we want a food plan for the city. And that was fortunate in that the person that we commissioned to develop the food plan for the city was local and actually was part of this overall sort of infrastructure, but had a background in food policy development. So that was quite lucky. So if you can find somebody like that, do use them. We used everything from the Youth Council to the Sheffield Healthy City Network. We had a number of conferences across the city in a number of different locations, some sort of comparatively local and some of them citywide. Went across the whole of what was then the local area agreement partnership boards across environment and health and economy, and presented the ideas and ultimately ended up with a food plan that was approved through what is essentially now called the Executive Board, but used to be called the Local Strategic Partnership. And the other thing that we do as part of this, and a very powerful tool within all of this, is the use of the food festival. We found it very important that we connect the food festival in the city and the food plan. If they're separate things, you're missing an enormous trick. What we've wanted to do with our food plan is to make it as inclusive as possible. Sheffield is quite diverse. It has a very big geographic footprint. That means that we have a number of lobbies from a number of different areas. So that's from a variety of very sort of city centre, urban, sort of deprived communities out into more rural areas who are equally deprived but are probably associated with rural deprivation and the whole economic problem around farming. So we have a very broad church that we have to try and work with. And the food festival is very effective in helping us doing that. In terms of what we'll achieve, we ended up with, I think it's 8 different sections within the plan. The first one was about food businesses and about being a city of high quality and profitable food businesses. Improve market access. That's market as in the local market. And I've put that in because it's quite an interesting one, because the market where it stands at the moment was very much the traditional market in the traditional working class area of the city with a traditional working class footprint of people that attended. We're moving it, and interestingly we're moving it towards the Waitrose end of town, which is an interesting dilemma for me, because it's a bit of a gentrification of the whole market sort of mentality. And I can't decide how much of a good thing that is. I'm very concerned that we move the market away from what is the traditional shopping area of potentially the poorer end of the city and potentially gentrify it. And that the whole thing about provenance is something that I'm trying to keep within the sort of poorer end of the city as well as the sort of more aspirational end of the city. And that's very important to us. And to be honest, the market thing, I can't decide whether that's going to be a help or a hindrance. But certainly we will end up with a very nice market, and one can only hope that everyone travels with it, and there is free travel around the city to enable that to happen. We are trying very hard to avoid the movement of the market having an impact on the nature of the clientele and a reduction in the clientele that currently attend. School food. We've had it's not a battle, but we have our challenges with school food because of the money aspect. We would like to have said we want all of our schools to have Food for Life accreditation within the first 12 months. They just couldn't afford it. So we are working with the school food contractors to move towards that within the next couple of years. But to a certain extent, the apology from the school food team was actually better than them actually agreeing to do it, because they almost feel slightly guilty for not being able to help us with that. So they're actually working harder with us on it than we would have expected. Local food. The local provenance issue is a massive issue for us in the city, and there are a number of people working at it from a number of different angles. We have a By Sheffield brand anyway that was traditionally associated with the cutlery industry in the city, with the steel industry in the city, but has broadened itself because of the diversity of food offer in the city to include food. We have a local food hub. Indeed, we have more than one local food hubs, because what you will find is having an aspiration for one food hub, there will be somebody else in another area of the city saying it doesn't quite work for us. We want to set up something similar on a smaller scale. So I guess the message there is be prepared to be flexible on what you think you want to achieve. because you will find things that come along that you don't expect and think, okay, we have to work with that. Public sector catering, public sector food, as Lord Curry alluded to, I am equally frustrated. It is a constant battle. If I had £1 for every time I've been told that it's because of procurement rules, I'd be quite a wealthy man. I still don't buy it, but I still equally haven't actually been able to prove why it isn't. Probably because my life is too short, and they just basically ground me down. But I won't let go until we get some more local procurement in there. And I won't let go because it's a significant aspect within Sheffield especially has quite a high public sector involvement. We have 2 universities, we've got 2 foundation trust hospitals, we've got a local authority, we've got headquarters of DWP, etc, etc, etc. A big lump of potential local procurement could go that way if we would be just willing to make effort. And I'm not going to stop. So I just will keep making a nuisance of myself until they all give in. And we are getting some support at last from some of the highest people within the organisation. It's interesting that all of the chairmen and the chief execs of these places completely buy into the idea. Every time. There's no argument against it. There is no philosophical argument. It's only when you get the people that it's just a bit too much trouble sometimes. And we just have to try and make it as easy as possible for them. So be prepared for that challenge. That is the big one to me. And if we succeed in that one, that will be a massive plus. Life stages, community food growing, cooking and culture, access to healthy food. Some of these, to be perfectly honest, smack a bit like compromises to engage a number of different people within this agenda. We were very wary, for example, of not wanting to upset the Primary Care Trust, who previously led on the food plan, but that made it a very health-based food plan. And this is not a health-based food plan. This is a food plan about resilience and about sustainable food production within the city. So we've included some aspects of, for example, there's a significant amount of funding going into things like cook and eat programs within the city and with obesity programs within the city, funded by the PCT. We needed to embrace those, A, because it's important, and obesity is a massive issue in the city, but B, because I believe that we have to look at different ways of funding and different sources of funding to make some of this stuff happen. I know, for example, that Brighton have used some of their obesity and weight management contract funding to create a partnership within the city that enables their project of this nature to be sustainable on a year-by-year ongoing basis. So what I'm saying is there are a number of different funding streams across the city that we need to be putting together to create what is essentially a more resilient food system in the city, and therefore one has to include a fairly broad church of people involved. Community food growing is massive in Sheffield. I don't think it's unfair to say it was incredibly exciting when I went to find out what was going off around community food growing. I had no idea of the amount of stuff that is happening. And is increasing in spite of the economic downturn. One thing that seems to happen when people are doing it because it's a passion, it don't actually matter whether there's an economic downturn. They will keep doing it. In fact, they will probably keep doing it even more. And therefore, we're seeing a growth in that. And some of the big successes that we've got there is linking that with things like our allotments and things like some of our more deprived communities. We have a significant Roma population in the city, and they live in the worst housing, in the worst area, and have the worst health figures. So in terms of health inequalities, there is a big disaster waiting to happen there. And one of the big successes there is we've bent some rules, or they've bent some rules along with allotment owners have said, for example, allotment lists have a waiting list and you've been on it 5 years and you might get one in a year's time. It's a massive issue. There's a big allotment waiting list, but where the allotments are wanted, that doesn't always match where the allotments are. So we've had to do some matching and mixing, and we've had to break a few rules, basically. For example, I haven't personally, so I'll disown it if anybody accuses me of doing this. We've managed to provide significant allotment space for Roma families that weren't on the waiting list. The truth of the matter is that they have converted some allotments that have been falling into disrepair for several years and had turned them into small market gardens within a year. They have done marvellous things with the allotments in the city. So think laterally about your partners and how you might be able to help with them. Adult care, think about adult care, think about where adult care normally happens. It normally happens in probably old buildings, quite often with big grounds. We've managed to convince some of our adult care services to actually start providing land for people to grow food on. and it's proven to be quite therapeutic for the residents of the place as well as advantageous for the people that are doing the stuff. So there's a number of different partners there thinking laterally. That's the plan. Sorry, it doesn't quite fit. Essentially, it's those 8 groups there. That is not in any sort of hierarchical order either, so I'm just going to skip over that. What we've got planned to do, there is a number of sort of mapping activities there about what's happening within the sustainable food system in the city, what's being produced where, what's required where, and exactly how far we can develop some of this in terms of essentially concentric circles starting from the centre of the city working outwards, exactly what we can achieve moving outwards from the city in terms of demand within it. Some of these are still aspirational because the next thing, one thing that I will say is we've hit a bit of a blip because I rather foolishly agreed, because I thought she deserved it, to let our food plan development officer go on a secondment to the core cities for 12 months. And therefore it's all fallen on my shoulders and therefore it has decelerated. But these things will happen when you are doing this sort of stuff, that there will be glitches. But one of the things that I have found rewarding is the fact that there are a number of different voluntary sector agencies that have just kept going and it really hasn't made any difference. So be prepared, be flexible. We're developing some, the food growing guide is an interesting one. One of the things that we assumed was that people, that we had resources and capacity within the city about growing, we just didn't have access to the land. We found that's not actually true. We found there's a massive demand for people who would like to develop, for example, local growing projects, but just don't have the skills to do it. There is a bit of a skills gap there in the city, and therefore we've had to think about providing help for the city to actually improve the capacity to grow, as well as finding ways to improve access to the land in the city. The Green Prescription Referral System of Providers Guide is an interesting one, and again, is a little bit of probably slightly lateral thought, but works incredibly well, where essentially we're using growing and community food growing as essentially a therapy within the NHS. So we're getting GP referrals from certain GP surgeries within certain areas of the city who are essentially using a particular growing project as a therapeutic solution. Obviously, it has to be better than antidepressants, and essentially that's what it's been at the moment. It's been a replacement for antidepressants for a number of people within the city, and it's getting a resource into that group. So there are a number of sort of aspects of this that we shouldn't underestimate potential funding sources for as well. The Healthy Restaurant Food Scheme, we haven't done it. It's too hard at the moment. It's just too hard. And because there are so many things that people want to do within restaurants, I just said, please, let's not deluge restaurants with another award. Let's have one big one for the city that puts all of these things together. And we will do it, but we will do it in a coherent way rather than rushing off and creating an award that everybody's forgot about within 2 years' time, which I suspect has happened in Durham, the same as it's happened in Sheffield in the past. And I can see from people smiling that it obviously has. The lunchtime supervisor training in terms of the healthy lunchbox policy is something that we are pursuing. A number of the schools are wanting to get involved in this. A number of the schools are concerned about the diet of the kids and how they deal with letting kids out, because the nearest shop that they go to, if they let them out at lunchtime, is a Penelope's, which is basically a greasy spoon that's just across the road, or it's the garage, and it's just either crisps and pop. And they're wrestling with this dilemma, and they're wanting our help in terms of exactly what that policy can be. So working with the children's team within the local authority is another aspect of the project. Learning, this is the key one really. It's an interesting idea, but be clear what the message is. Don't complicate it. People will log off, but definitely disassociate it from the health lobby. It is not just about health. Resilient food system in the city is not just about health, and you have to make sure that gets across straight away, because lots of cities have got food plans, but they're normally always about 5 a day. There's a lot going on in your communities that you don't know about. Be prepared to embrace that and use those people. The media, etc., were hugely interested in the idea of food heroes in the city. People that were doing heroic stuff with food, and that was whether that was about running a cafe for people with mental illness, by people within the city through the Health and Social Care Trust, or whether it was about a new particular graduate that came to the city from Malaysia and graduated and decided to stay here and had created a restaurant, then all of those things are very positive and create an interest. And in actual fact, we managed to secure interest from the local media about a resilient food system, which was no mean feat, truth be told. And these are from food writers that are traditionally just putting in articles about local restaurants. So that was a big plus for us. There's a lot that's happened in the past to get you to where you are now. That's a reference really to the food plans primarily from the PCT in Sheffield. You would probably be taking more than you give. There is an enormous amount that people have to offer in terms of the projects that are happening in a place like Durham or Sheffield, but you will be taking more than you give from them. And I guess you've got to recognise that. And that's not just about the people that are involved in this, but in terms of the educationalists within the city, the volunteers within the city, the businesses within the city. They all want to get involved. Certainly in Sheffield, that's what we're finding. Developing a narrative takes time. Be careful that the narrative is right. So don't try diving in too quick about what this is all about, and try and develop a narrative that everybody buys into and says, yeah, we get it, we understand that that's what it's about. It won't be the council's number one concern, that's for sure. We will know that when, during the time of austerity like this, you will be finding that there are some bigger deals within the city, and they are important, and therefore you have to make yours very interesting and pertinent. Be prepared to let go. Some of these things you just can't keep within the local authority. I suspect there are a number of people here that aren't in the local authority. They'll be all saying yes. Be prepared to let go, local authority. It's a fine line between enthusiasm and evangelism. It is a fine line. Be careful not to get too evangelical. We found one or two evangelists within this area that were potentially a turn-off in terms of the city. So be careful there. I'm quite sceptical by nature, and it normally takes some selling for me, but I truly believe that this work has massive value, not just in terms of the broader strategic aspects that Lord Curry referred to, but literally as a community development tool within the city. It's been a massive asset to us. And finally, very quickly, the big one for us, the big piece of glue within all of this has been the food festival. It's very inclusive. It tries to get that balance between diversity and local provenance. We've got about 300 languages spoken within our schools, so that creates a very diverse food culture in the city. And we try and be as inclusive as that, with that as we can, whilst at the same time retaining the idea of provenance and local production and local procurement. So the food festival works very well for us as a glue because it is inclusive. Now I can see that you've got a food festival here. I would just say please make sure that you're joined up and you're selling the same message, because if you're not, essentially you've got two messages about the same thing and people will be confused. So try and jump on the back of that. So really that's just my very quick run through about the pearls of wisdom that we've got from Sheffield. And I can only wish you all the best, because I know that it will be a very enjoyable journey that you're going to be on. One of the best thing that we've found is that people really want to engage in this, and I'm convinced that that will be the case. So good luck with it. Think about the Soil Association Sustainable Food Cities, an opportunity to join and for us to all sort of put expertise together and maybe overcome some of those local procurement barriers that I could see lots of heads nodding about that one. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Can you hear me all right? Chris has to leave, so if any of you have a couple of questions, we've got a couple of minutes before we can let you go for a comfort break and to grab your yoghurt. Is it yoghurt and juice that's available for everybody? It's a local yoghurt, you'll be glad to know. Keep you healthy. Are there any burning questions from the floor? Maybe over here.
You may not be able to answer this, but I would like to know whether Sheffield put a limit on the profit element in their procurement contracts that they put out. Because it's a question which I write to a number of councils and ask them whether they actually put a ceiling on the profit for the public contracts that have to go out in order to protect the public purse. And I don't get the impression that very many councils do, although they have that power.
You're right, I'm not the person to ask. Yes, I'd be happy to go back and ask and to feed back. To be honest, the work that we've done so far suggests not, because it's been very much hands off. This is what we do. If they make a profit out of it, that's fine. This is the best value contract for us. So simply, I'd be very surprised if they do.
I suspect procurement is a big thing for the lady over here.
Are there any weightings in relation to locally produced food in the purchasing?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Do they ever weight the purchase in the contracts, the procurement? Is it ever
Yeah.
weighted in accordance with locally produced food, for instance, going back into the economy?
Yeah. That is essentially our battle that we're fighting, the extent of the weighting. The extent of the weighting and the overcoming the alleged differential that creates in terms of value for money. So basically, do you want to pay a bit more for it because it comes back into the local economy? And how much more are you willing to pay for it on the basis of building that criteria in? That is essentially always the argument, that if we want to keep it local, it will cost more. We have to get the balance between the two. And at the moment, you know, the silos do exist, and therefore the fact that it's coming back into the local economy isn't enough of a concern for the procurement teams within the local authority to say, yes, we accept that that's a better thing on the whole, and therefore we're willing to take a hit on it. For example, how do we get that back in to the school food contract? At the moment, we've not overcome that. And there's things like the Sustainable Food Cities Collaborative has the potential to do some work around that, I think, and say, okay, let's have a think about within the procurement rules, let's get some procurement experts and overcome these arguments.
Do they ever have joint procurement around public sector food systems? So, for instance, hospitals and schools and education?
That's what we wanted to do. That is essentially the big...
So, out of the food partnership, if that joint procurement policy, if you like, was an output,
that would be it.
Then lead towards...
That's right. That would be it for me in terms of the local food procurement. If we could create that agreement across essentially the five biggest procurers in the city, and say, can we sit down around a table and agree how much extra local procurement we're going to secure progressively over the next 5 years, for example. That's essentially what we're working towards at the moment.
And just finally, is the Health and Wellbeing Board an area that could, because they'll be looking right across the system, won't they?
Yes, but at the moment, it's pretty much obsessed with setting itself up and figuring out how it's going to spend £1 billion looking at an ageing population and a CCG that's not used to spending that much money. So it's probably about timing there, and it's not the time for that one.
Got a couple more questions, and then I'm going to have to cut it, I'm afraid, otherwise you'll never get your comfort break and your yoghurt. Lady at the back and then one in front.
You said that local food's often more expensive and that puts the procurers off. And the reason things are often more expensive is that things are produced at very, very cheap. I mean, I'm a flour producer, and our rival flour mills are buying in wheat and such like from Kazakhstan and Canada much cheaper than we can buy it, buying it from Yorkshire producers. So we can't get it that cheap, so our product is a bit more expensive. Is there such an idea as offering a minimum price so that you have to pay no less than and taking into the costs of production?
I don't know. To be honest, we're getting too far into the realms of procurement of food, so I simply don't know the answer to that. It would make sense, and certainly I'm aware of the argument across everything from grain to livestock and the costs and the subsidies coming from abroad. And, you know, we have a number of absurd situations. We've seen one in the city where milk from a local dairy was poured down a drain during the fuel strike because they couldn't get it taken away, whilst at the same time the supermarket about 5 miles down the road was struggling to take a delivery because it was coming from somewhere else. So we see the anomalies that happen as a result of this procurement, especially from abroad, but I don't know whether or not it's actually possible to do that legally, to be honest.
I think there's a whole complex debate to be had on procurement, and it's happening in other realms as well, and on all sorts of issues around services and procuring services. So food procurement issue is one, again, that we're probably going to see a lot more of in the next few months in public sector and with the providers and service people as well. One more question, and then we're really going to have to break. You had one in front?
And how supermarkets can be sort of brought into a food strategy. And I'm wondering whether you've had been able to or tried to have you done up with supermarkets, because if I've got it right, I think the planning system in Sheffield has seen supermarkets as sort of the main way to feed a growing population, to build more supermarkets, feed more people that way. So I'm wondering sort of whether the food plan is seen sort of as an alternative or something on the margins, or whether there's a way of bringing everything together.
Yeah, supermarkets, I suspect not just in Sheffield but across the UK have been seen as the way to deliver, and certainly the supermarkets have presented that case very convincingly in appeals against refusals for planning policy. I don't think that Sheffield sees the food plan as the be-all and end-all. I know that it doesn't. Truth be told, it couldn't do it. If everybody closed the supermarkets down tomorrow and say, OK, food plan experts, feed the city, there'd be a lot of hungry people out there. So these things take time. We have done some work with some of the supermarkets. One of the supermarkets is sponsoring the festival this year, for example, and has a particular interest in the sort of local food and provenance aspect. Some of them are more interested than others. But I believe, and we spoke to them about it, and they've said that they're under pressure from their customers to provide more local food. So they do believe in it, maybe just not particularly for the sort of same reasons. They believe in it because they believe that's what their customers are asking for. To a certain extent, that's the other approach that we're taking, that says if the customers ask for it, the supermarkets will provide it. But the simple answer is that no, it's not the be-all and end-all. We are doing some work, but that everybody knows that is the toughest nut to crack. And to a certain extent, yeah, the truth be told, the food plan works alongside the supermarkets and not within them particularly well at the moment. And to a certain extent, we just rely on building up a momentum and a power of voice across the city, such that supermarkets start thinking, actually, there's some miles in this. We need to do this for our own customers, for fear of losing customers to other supermarkets that do so. And I think that's the way that the sponsor's doing it at the moment. So we're doing it a bit, but nowhere near as much as we'd like to. But these things take time.